The engine coughed, rattled, and fell silent. Noah Briggs wiped his hands on a worn rag and leaned over the open hood of the old Ford pickup. It was 9 a.m. on May 4th, 1999, an ordinary morning in his small garage outside Stillwater, Oklahoma. The radio on the shelf played a country station just loud enough to fill the empty space. His coffee sat beside the toolbox, still warm, the surface trembling each time the air compressor kicked in. Noah had been repairing trucks since his teenage years. He liked the rhythm of metal and oil, the calm repetition of fixing something broken until it ran again. That morning he was alone. His assistant had called in sick. A customer was due to collect the Ford before noon. Nothing seemed unusual. At 9:14 a.m., Noah was seen refueling his own pickup at a gas station on Route 51. He greeted the clerk, bought a pack of mints, and left without hurry. Security footage showed him pulling into the garage less than 10 minutes later. From that moment on, no one saw him alive again. The next few hours left behind only traces, small, unremarkable details that would later become clues. The door to the office was left ajar. The lights were still on. The calendar on the wall had the date circled, reminding him to order new brake pads. The cash register was untouched. At 12:30 p.m., a delivery driver stopped by to drop off parts. He noticed Noah's truck parked outside but did not see him around. He assumed Noah was working out back and left the box near the door. Nothing seemed out of place. By early evening, the sun dipped low over the field behind the garage. The building stood quiet, only the faint buzz of a fluorescent light inside breaking the silence. Around 7:45 p.m., a customer named Jim Ralston arrived to collect his repaired truck. He called out Noah's name twice, no answer. He walked around the side, knocked on the office door, and saw the half-finished coffee still sitting there. The radio was on. The hood of the Ford was open, tools laid neatly in a row. Jim waited a few minutes, then tried Noah's phone. The line rang through. On the workbench, he noticed Noah's jacket hanging on a hook, wallet in the pocket, keys still attached. A set of tire tracks curved behind the building toward the gravel road, stopping abruptly where the dirt met the grass. Jim felt uneasy. He stepped back inside and saw that the wall clock had stopped at 2:17 p.m. Whether it had lost power or been hit, no one could tell. The silence inside the garage was heavy, unnatural. Jim locked the door behind him and drove straight to the Payne County Sheriff's Office. Deputies arrived within 30 minutes. They searched the property with flashlights, calling Noah's name into the dark. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints, no broken glass. His truck remained parked exactly as he had left it that morning. The shop phone's last outgoing call had been to a local parts supplier at 10:06 a.m. Investigators photographed every corner: the oily floor, the discarded rag, the coffee cup. One deputy collected a smudge from the office door, faint but visible under the flashlight beam. They dusted it for prints. Inside Noah's desk, they found only receipts and handwritten notes about repairs. Nothing suggested that he had planned to leave. By midnight, officers expanded the search to nearby roads and fields. A helicopter scanned the area with thermal imaging. Still nothing. The garage, once filled with the sound of engines, now stood as a hollow shell under the sodium lights of the patrol cars. The following morning, family members confirmed that Noah had not come home. His truck, wallet, and keys were still at the shop. The coffee cup remained on the bench, its contents cold. Detectives began to suspect foul play. Neighbors recalled seeing a dark-colored pickup idling near the garage around lunchtime the day before. None of them recognized the driver. The security camera at the gas station captured Noah's routine stop, but no sign of anyone following him. It was as if he had simply vanished in broad daylight. The sheriff's department sealed off the garage as a potential crime scene. Officers marked tire impressions behind the building with orange flags. A few faint spots near the rear wall tested positive for traces of blood, too small for analysis with the tools available in 1999. As news spread across Stillwater, locals gathered near the roadside, watching the investigation unfold. Noah was well-liked, quiet, reliable, known for fixing old engines for half the price. No one could imagine who would want to harm him. The day ended without answers. The tools stayed lined up on the bench exactly as he had left them. The Ford pickup, half repaired, waited for its final tune-up. And on the ignition switch, beneath the thin layer of dust and fingerprints, one simple detail remained. The keys were still in the ignition. But Noah Briggs was gone. By the time he was 32, Noah Briggs had become a fixture in the small, dusty town just outside Stillwater. People described him as steady, the kind of man who kept to himself but never turned anyone away who needed help. He fixed farm trucks that others had given up on, welded broken gates for neighbors without charging, and often stayed late in his garage long after the lights in town went dark. Noah was born and raised in Payne County. His father had worked the oil fields. His mother taught at the local elementary school. After high school, while others moved to Oklahoma City or joined the military, Noah stayed. He opened Briggs Auto Repair, a one-man shop that quickly became the heartbeat of the farming community. Everyone knew where to find him. Bent under a hood, sleeves rolled up, country radio playing low in the background. He lived in a small rental house on the outskirts of town, a short drive from his garage. There were no signs of luxury in his life, just a truck, a few fishing rods, and stacks of car magazines. To most, he was a man content with routine. He woke early, arrived at the shop by 8, and rarely took vacations. Sundays were for family dinners or fishing trips with old friends at Lake Carl Blackwell. Noah had once been married. Her name was Lena Carter, a local nurse. They were together for 3 years before quietly divorcing. Those close to him said there was no drama, no lingering bitterness. They simply wanted different things. Lena later moved to Tulsa, but she kept in touch with Noah from time to time. She told investigators later that he had seemed fine the last time they spoke. Calm, maybe a little tired, but never troubled. Customers described him as patient, sometimes almost too trusting. He allowed people to delay payments and kept meticulous handwritten ledgers of repairs. He was not the type to argue or raise his voice. That made his disappearance all the more unsettling. A man with no enemies, no debts, and no vices simply vanished in the middle of an ordinary workday. Inside his garage, detectives found pieces of his daily life that spoke louder than words. The old coffee mug with his name scratched on the side. The pocket calendar marked with oil-stained fingerprints. A faded Polaroid of his first truck taped to the wall. Each detail suggested a man who planned for tomorrow, a man who never intended to walk away. Friends remembered him as a quiet presence at the local diner. He sat in the same corner booth every Friday, ordering chicken fried steak and sweet tea. He tipped generously, sometimes slipping bills under the plate so no one noticed. On summer nights, he could be found at the gas station parking lot, talking engines with other mechanics. People trusted him instinctively. He fixed their cars, but more than that, he fixed their days. The community's respect for Noah was simple and deep. When a farmer's tractor broke during harvest, Noah arrived before dawn to repair it. When a young couple's car failed on the way to the hospital, he towed it for free. He never asked for attention, and he never expected thanks. Yet, beneath that steady surface, no one knew much about his private thoughts. He lived alone, no children, no known disputes. He rarely went out after dark, and he never left town without telling someone. That made the events of May 4, 1999 impossible to explain. There was no reason for him to disappear, and no hint that anyone wished him harm. When investigators began their search, they quickly realized how limited their information was. They could describe his habits and his work, but they could not name a single person who had seen him in distress or anger. Even his closest friends admitted they did not know what Noah did after closing the garage each night. In Stillwater, where everyone noticed when someone's truck was missing from its usual parking spot, his vanishing left a strange silence. The man everyone knew, whose hands had fixed nearly every vehicle in town, had simply ceased to exist between morning and dusk. In a town where everyone knew everyone, nobody saw Noah leave. At 9:14 a.m. on May 4, 1999, a security camera at the Route 51 gas station captured Noah Briggs refueling his red pickup. He paid in cash, bought a small pack of mints, and exchanged a brief wave with the clerk. His expression was calm, his movements ordinary. He returned to his truck, placed the receipt neatly in the console, and drove east toward his garage. It would be the last confirmed sighting of him alive. By 9:25 a.m., Noah arrived at Briggs Auto Repair, the delivery truck from Oklahoma Parts. Supply was due before noon, and 2 vehicles waited in the lot for service. He unlocked the door, turned on the fluorescent lights, and began work on the blue Ford pickup that had stalled the previous evening. Witnesses later said the radio played low, as it always did, tuned to a country station from Tulsa. At 10:06 a.m., the phone records show a brief call from Noah to the parts supplier, confirming delivery of brake pads and filters. His handwriting in the order book matches the date and time. Nothing unusual stood out. Between 11:30 and 12:15 p.m., Terry Lawson, the delivery driver, arrived with the scheduled shipment. He saw Noah's truck parked outside the garage, keys still in the ignition. The front door was open, lights on, but no one answered when he called out. Believing Noah might be out back testing an engine, Terry placed the boxes near the office door and left. His delivery log confirmed his arrival time as 11:47 a.m. When investigators later reconstructed the timeline, that window, between 11:45 and 12 hours, became the critical gap. Everything before it fit Noah's routine. Everything after it fell into silence. By 2 p.m., a passing motorist noticed the garage door still open but assumed Noah was inside working. The faint hum of the radio could be heard from the road. The workbench light glowed through the glass. The world continued moving, unaware that Noah Briggs was already gone. It was not until 7:45 p.m. that the first alarm sounded. Customer Jim Ralston arrived to collect his truck. He found the building dark, the office door unlocked. The coffee on the table had gone cold. The Ford pickup in the bay was untouched. Tools lined up precisely where Noah had placed them that morning. Deputies from the Payne County Sheriff's Office arrived within the hour. Their flashlights cut across the concrete floor, catching the glint of metal and the soft drift of dust in the air. They photographed everything: the empty chair, the open toolbox, the untouched register. Nothing appeared forced or stolen. The day's earnings, just over $90, remained in the drawer. Behind the building, the ground told a different story. Tire tracks, fresh and distinct, curved sharply toward the rear gate. They did not belong to Noah's truck. The tread pattern suggested a heavy pickup, possibly a commercial vehicle. The tracks stopped abruptly at the edge of the gravel road, as if someone had backed out in a hurry. Investigators scoured the area with flashlights. No footprints, no drag marks, no discarded objects. Only a faint dark stain near the back wall, later determined to be blood, too little to test with the technology available in 1999. Detective Robert Keene, the lead investigator, noted in his report that the scene appeared frozen mid-task. Nothing about it suggested preparation or flight. Noah's keys, wallet and jacket were found inside. His lunch, a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in wax paper, sat untouched near the sink. The immediate theory was robbery. Rural garages often kept cash on site, and the isolated location made it an easy target. But after hours of searching, nothing supported that idea. Every tool was accounted for. The safe was locked. Noah's truck remained parked in its usual spot. By midnight, deputies expanded the perimeter. Search dogs followed a short trail leading behind the shop, but lost the scent within a few hundred yards near the tree line. Helicopters equipped with infrared cameras scanned the surrounding fields. There were no signs of a body, no heat signatures, no trace of a vehicle heading toward town. Interviews began the next morning. The gas station clerk confirmed seeing Noah earlier that day. The delivery driver repeated his account, adding that a dark green Dodge Ram had been parked on the roadside near the garage when he left. He had not thought much of it then. Within days, a new name surfaced. Dale Morton, a truck driver who had been in a heated argument with Noah a week earlier over an unpaid repair bill. Witnesses recalled raised voices outside the garage, though the dispute ended quickly. Dale insisted it was nothing serious. He had since taken a hauling job in Texas. Detectives tried to contact him but reached only a disconnected number. His old employer confirmed he had left town suddenly that same week. For investigators, it was the first thread of suspicion in an otherwise spotless record. Back at the crime scene, forensic technicians re-examined the office door. Under the glare of portable lights, they lifted several fingerprints. Most belonged to Noah. One did not. The print was partial, smeared along the brass handle, but clear enough to rule out family, employees, or frequent customers. It belonged to an unknown male. That single detail, a half-formed fingerprint, left behind in the quiet of an abandoned garage, became the only physical clue in a case that already felt like a ghost story. The discovery raised one impossible question that would haunt detectives for decades. If Noah never left the shop, who closed the door behind him? By dawn on May 5, 1999, Payne County deputies had sealed off the perimeter of Briggs Auto Repair. The soft hum of insects filled the early air as investigators walked slowly through the scene, marking every footprint, every tire track, every tool left on the bench. What they saw made little sense. Nothing pointed to robbery, nothing to flight. The life of a quiet mechanic had stopped in the middle of a workday, leaving behind only silence. Detective Robert Keene led the investigation. A 20-year veteran of the sheriff's office, he was known for methodical work and little patience for speculation. He began with the basics, the timeline, the people, the last confirmed contact. The delivery driver had seen Noah's truck at 11:47 a.m. By 7:45 p.m., the garage was empty. The gap between those hours became the focus. Forensic technicians finished their sweep of the property that morning. They catalogued Noah's tools, wallet, and phone records. The faint trace of blood behind the garage tested positive for human origin, but the quantity was too small for DNA analysis by 1999 standards. It was placed in evidence anyway, sealed and logged. The partial fingerprint from the office door was sent to the state lab in Oklahoma City, though results could take weeks. Detectives fanned out across Stillwater, interviewing co-workers, family, and customers. Noah's sister described him as reliable and calm, a man who never missed a shift and rarely left town. His friends repeated the same story. He had no debts, no disputes, no enemies anyone could name, except possibly one. That name came up repeatedly. Dale Morton, a 43-year-old truck driver who had brought his rig to Noah's shop for clutch repair 2 weeks earlier. Witnesses said the two men argued over the final bill. Dale insisted he had already paid part of it in cash. Noah's records showed otherwise. The dispute lasted less than 10 minutes, ending with Dale slamming the truck door and driving off. Detectives traced Dale's address to a small rental trailer on the outskirts of town. He was not home when officers arrived. Neighbors said he had left 2 days earlier, heading to Texas for a new hauling job. One neighbor mentioned seeing his green Dodge Ram parked outside Noah's garage a few times before, usually after hours. A notice was issued through the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, and Dale was eventually located in Wichita Falls, Texas 3 days later. He agreed to an interview at a local sheriff's office. The interview lasted over 2 hours. Dale appeared nervous but cooperative. He admitted to arguing with Noah about the repair bill, but denied any involvement in his disappearance. He claimed that on May 4th, he had been driving a delivery route from Lawton to Dallas, hauling construction supplies. When asked for delivery receipts, he produced them, but one was handwritten, the timestamp smudged. Detectives later confirmed that while his truck was logged leaving Lawton that morning, there was a 3-hour gap before his next recorded stop in Denton. That gap placed him within possible driving distance of Stillwater. Still, there was no evidence connecting him directly to the crime scene. His fingerprints were taken voluntarily. None matched the partial print from Noah's office door. His truck was searched top to bottom. No traces of blood, no fibers, no personal belongings of Noah Briggs. Detective Keene wrote in his report. Suspect demonstrates deceptive mannerisms, but no physical evidence to support charge. Dale Morton was released pending further investigation. Meanwhile, search efforts intensified around the area. Over the next 2 weeks, deputies, volunteers, and canine units combed the fields surrounding the garage. The Cimarron River, 5 miles north, was dragged multiple times. Helicopters scanned farmland and wooded ravines. Nothing surfaced. Not a piece of clothing, not a tire mark, not a single sign of Noah Briggs. The community's patience began to fray. Each day brought more questions than answers. The sheriff's office set up a tip line that flooded with rumors. Sightings of Noah in Tulsa, whispers of gambling debts, a story about him leaving town to start over. None of it held. The forensic lab returned its first results by late May. The fingerprint from the office door was incomplete and unsuitable for database comparison. The blood sample confirmed human origin, but was insufficient for typing. Every lead dissolved into frustration. Detectives rechecked the garage several times, hoping they had missed something. They opened tool drawers, lifted floor panels, even examined the insulation inside the office walls. Everything remained stubbornly ordinary. By the third week, Detective Keene began to realize what the file was becoming. Another cold stack of paper in the evidence room. He refused to admit it out loud, but the case was slipping away. Each morning, he returned to his office, spread the photos across his desk, and stared at the same details. The empty coffee cup, the silent radio, the untouched cash drawer. The investigation reached a standstill. Dale Morton had returned to work in Texas, living under no suspicion beyond a few unanswered questions. Without DNA, without a witness, the case had nothing to hold him. Then, just as the team prepared to close their search perimeter, a new voice entered the picture. On June 2nd, a man named Earl Danner, a farmer from the rural edge of Payne County, called the sheriff's office. He had been reluctant to come forward earlier, fearing he might have been mistaken. But something about the reports on television had unsettled him. He told investigators that on the night Noah disappeared, just after sunset on May 4th, he was driving home along a dirt road that followed the Cimarron River. He remembered seeing a green Dodge Ram pulled off near the riverbank. Its headlights off, tailgate down. A tall man stood beside it, tossing what looked like heavy trash bags into the brush. When he slowed down, the man turned away from the road. The farmer had not seen his face, but he remembered the truck's distinctive rusted fender. It matched the description of Dale Morton's vehicle. The news of Noah Briggs's disappearance spread through Stillwater faster than the wind that swept across its empty fields. By the end of the first week, every diner counter, church hallway, and feed store echoed with the same question. How could Noah vanish in the middle of the day, just miles from home? Flyers appeared on telephone poles and gas pumps, printed with his photograph, a quiet man with tired eyes and an honest smile. Volunteers organized search parties that stretched for miles along the Cimarron River and through the back roads where he might have driven. Farmers offered their trucks, students brought flashlights, and deputies mapped the routes. The first vigil was held near his garage, candles flickering beside a row of toolboxes and faded photos. Locals stood in silence as the evening light faded, their reflections visible in the windows of the abandoned workshop. It was not loud mourning. It was quiet disbelief, the kind that sits heavy in the air when something unthinkable happens close to home. Noah's parents spoke to reporters only once. His father stood beside his wife, his voice steady but strained. He described his son as a good man who never turned anyone away. His mother said that every morning she still expected to hear his truck coming up the driveway. His younger sister, Emily, appeared on local television days later, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. She kept her composure, but her eyes gave away what words could not. As the weeks passed, theories began to fill the silence left by the lack of evidence. Some whispered that Noah had debts, though his business records proved stable. Others speculated about a secret relationship, or a double life away from Stillwater. Detectives chased each rumor, but every lead collapsed under fact. Noah had lived simply. There were no hidden accounts, no late-night phone calls, no sudden purchases or unusual behavior. The unease settled deep into the community. People began locking doors that had been left open for decades. Parents kept closer watch on their children. Gas stations posted new security cameras. In small towns, fear moves fast, and when there are no answers, it finds its own. Noah's garage became both memorial and warning. Flowers were left at the entrance. Customers who once came for repairs now came only to stand in silence. The smell of oil and dust remained, untouched since the night deputies sealed it off. Inside, the coffee cup still sat on the workbench, exactly where he had left it. By late summer, the vigils grew smaller. The flyers faded in the sun. Detectives continued to work quietly, revisiting interviews, double-checking alibis, searching again near the river where a farmer claimed to have seen a truck that night. Still nothing surfaced. 4 months passed. Then on a dry October afternoon, a hunter walking along a back road near Cushing, 30 miles from Stillwater, noticed something deep in the brush. It was a red pickup, rusted from rain, windows cracked, half covered in dirt. The plates matched the registration of Noah Briggs's truck. Inside, the keys were missing. The seat was pushed back farther than Noah ever sat. There were no signs of a struggle, only dust, silence, and the faint smell of engine oil lingering in the air. Months had gone by since he disappeared, but one thing became painfully clear. Noah Briggs had not driven that truck to where it was found. Someone else had. Detectives in Payne County refused to give up, even as weeks turned to months. Every new lead carried the same fragile hope that this would be the one to break the silence around Noah Briggs's disappearance. Each time it ended the same way, nowhere. Anonymous tips poured in. Some claimed Noah had been seen in Tulsa. Others swore he had taken off to Texas. A drifter in Kansas was brought in for questioning after boasting that he knew what happened to the mechanic in Stillwater, but his story fell apart within minutes. Every tip added another line to the growing case file, but none brought investigators closer to Noah. Officers followed the trails across back roads and through abandoned barns. They searched riverbanks and creek beds. They drained a section of the Cimarron after a local fisherman reported a tarp tangled in branches. It turned out to be nothing but torn plastic. Psychics began calling the sheriff's office, offering visions and cryptic clues. One described a dark water and a man's toolbox sinking beneath it. Another claimed Noah was alive and traveling west under another name. Detectives listened politely, wrote down the details and filed them away. Nothing matched the evidence. Nothing led anywhere. The most promising lead remained Dale Morton, the truck driver who had argued with Noah about a repair bill. He was questioned repeatedly. His statements changed slightly each time. At first, he said he was delivering a load in Enid on the day Noah vanished. Later, he claimed he had been homesick. When pressed, he could not produce any receipts or witnesses to support either story. Detectives searched his property but found no trace of Noah or his belongings. Dale's truck, once suspected to have been seen near the Cimarron River, was examined forensically, but no biological evidence tied it to the disappearance. With no physical proof, the district attorney refused to move forward. By the end of that summer, Dale Morton packed up and left Oklahoma. He told acquaintances he wanted a fresh start. Investigators noted his departure, but had no grounds to stop him. He drove away without ever being charged. Inside the Payne County Sheriff's Office, frustration deepened. The small blood trace on the shop floor was sent to the state crime lab, but in 1999, testing methods were crude. The sample was too degraded, too small. Analysts labeled it inconclusive. The partial fingerprint on the office door yielded no matches in any national database. Detective Harold Crenshaw, who had led the case from the first week, pushed to keep it active. He believed Noah had not left by choice, but with no new evidence and mounting unsolved cases, his superiors reassigned the team. Noah's file was placed in a cabinet marked pending review. Over the next few years, the case drifted between officers. Each time a new detective opened it, the same patterns appeared. Empty leads, lost evidence, conflicting witness statements. People who once knew details began to forget them. Addresses changed. Records were misplaced. By 2005, only Noah's family still called regularly for updates. His mother's voice grew softer each year. His father passed away in 2011 without ever knowing what happened to his son. Emily, his sister, stopped giving interviews. She told a friend she had run out of hope. The garage stood empty for more than a decade before being sold. New owners gutted the interior, but the old concrete floor remained. The faint stains where the investigators had once knelt over evidence were still visible beneath the paint. Time moved on, but the name Noah Briggs never vanished from local memory. Every few years, a story appeared in the newspaper about Stillwater's most enduring mystery. People still speculated about what had happened, but the answers were buried deeper than anyone could reach. inside the Payne County evidence room. The file sat on a shelf labeled Briggs Noah, Missing Person, 1999. The manila folder was thick with reports, photos, and faded maps. Dust gathered on the edges. For 20 years, no one opened it. Then, in 2019, a new detective joined the department, a woman assigned to review unresolved cases. On her first week, she walked through the evidence room, scanning names on the shelves. One caught her attention. She pulled the file marked Briggs Noah. The folder creaked open, pages yellowed with age. And as she read the first line of the report, she paused. Something inside the file did not fit. 20 years after Noah Briggs vanished, the case was about to come back to life. Years passed quietly in Stillwater. The once bustling garage that Noah Briggs had built with his own hands turned into a ghost of what it used to be. Its sign, once bright with red paint, faded to a dull pink under the Oklahoma sun. The gravel lot grew weeds, and the windows gathered dust thick enough to hide the life that had once worked behind them. By 2002, the town had moved on. A new auto shop opened closer to the highway, and customers stopped mentioning Noah's name. The older residents still remembered him, the young man who could bring an engine back to life with nothing but patience and a wrench. But the newer generation only knew the story as a warning. The Briggs family could not bear to stay. In 2003, Noah's parents sold their small home and moved to Arkansas, hoping that distance would ease the pain. It never did. His father grew quiet. His mother rarely spoke of her son again. Emily Briggs, now in her 30s, stayed behind for a few years before leaving Oklahoma altogether. She built a life elsewhere, but every year, on the anniversary of her brother's disappearance, she mailed a single letter to the Stillwater Sheriff's Office, asking if there was any news. The replies never changed. No new developments. The garage eventually went up for sale. The buyers gutted the inside, turning it into a storage space. The walls that once echoed with the sound of tools and country radio now stood in silence. The faint oil stains remained on the floor, hidden beneath a new layer of paint, like scars that would not fade. Detectives came and went through the Payne County office. The Briggs file sat untouched, its edges yellowing with time. Occasionally, a rookie would pick it up, skim through the reports, and place it back in the drawer. There was no new evidence to pursue, no new suspects to question. The case was officially considered inactive, a word colder than unsolved. Still, Noah's name did not disappear entirely. Every few years, a journalist revisited the story for a Missing in Oklahoma feature, printing the same black and white photograph of Noah leaning against a pickup, grease on his hands, a modest grin on his face. The stories drew sympathy, but no leads. Time dulled the edges of grief, but it never erased it. Emily married, started a family, and tried to explain to her children who their uncle had been. He fixed cars, she said once, and he was kind. But even she could not recall the sound of his voice anymore. The town of Stillwater changed. New buildings rose, roads expanded, faces came and went. But that empty garage on the edge of town remained a quiet reminder that even in small towns where everyone knows everyone, some stories never find their ending. Then came the silence of true forgetting. Years where no one mentioned Noah at all. His name became part of local folklore, a story told in fragments by people who were not even there. The coffee cup left half full, the truck abandoned miles away, the man who simply vanished. 2 decades had gone by. The world had changed. Technology advanced, DNA science evolved, databases grew larger than anyone could have imagined. Across the country, new programs were underway, designed to revisit old evidence and connect forgotten samples to modern genetic profiles. In early 2019, one such initiative, a nationwide DNA program, began scanning untested or partial samples from unsolved cases. Among them was a small degraded swab from Payne County, taken from a stain on a garage floor 20 years earlier. For decades, it had meant nothing. But this time, when the data uploaded into the system, the computer paused, then flashed an alert. A match had been found. The notification appeared on a crime lab technician's monitor in early April 2019. It was small, Just a flashing yellow box beside a file number that had not been opened in 2 decades. The entry read, Payne County, Oklahoma. Sample 1999947B. DNA match identified. The technician, Lauren Keene, leaned closer. She had been running the last batch of entries for the National DNA Initiative, a federal program created to retest old biological samples using advanced touch DNA methods. Most of the time, the results returned empty or inconclusive. But this one was different. The system had found a hit. The match linked to a man named Dale Morton, born 1958, currently registered in Texas. His DNA had entered the federal database after a 2017 assault conviction in Dallas County. Keene opened the Payne County record, scanning the brief summary. Missing person, male, Stillwater, 1999. Suspected foul play. Partial blood trace recovered at scene. The blood, once considered too degraded to test, had waited 20 years for technology to catch up. Now, under the precision of modern forensic science, the truth had emerged. Lauren printed the result and carried it straight to her supervisor. Within hours, the notification reached the Oklahoma Cold Case Unit in Oklahoma City. Detective Marla Jennings, the same investigator who had pulled Noah Briggs's file from the shelf weeks earlier, stood silently as the report was read aloud. The DNA belonged to the one man who had always hovered on the edge of suspicion, Dale Morton, the disgruntled truck driver who had argued with Noah Briggs days before he vanished. Jennings ordered the case reopened that afternoon. The evidence boxes, long sealed in storage, were retrieved from the Payne County vault. Inside, the faded photographs, handwritten notes, and brittle plastic bags told a story that had never been finished. Every detail was reviewed again. The tire tracks behind the garage, the missing keys, the untouched cash drawer, the witness who had seen a truck near the Cimarron River. Now there was something none of those detectives in 1999 had ever had. Proof. Forensic reports confirmed that the blood found near the workbench belonged not to Noah, but to Dale Morton. The scene began to take new shape. Investigators theorized that an argument had escalated inside the shop. Dale might have injured himself, possibly during a confrontation, and left traces behind as he dragged Noah away. Jennings and her partner, Detective Ryan Cole, began retracing every step of Dale's past 2 decades. He had left Oklahoma shortly after the disappearance, moving between trucking jobs across the South. In 2005, he had been charged with domestic assault in Louisiana, though the case was dropped. By 2010, he was living under a different address in East Texas. The 2017 conviction for aggravated assault had finally placed his DNA into the national system, the act that unknowingly tied him back to Noah Briggs. The discovery sent shockwaves through the department. A case once seen as unsolvable now had a clear suspect and a chance for justice. Jennings contacted Texas law enforcement, requesting an address check for Morton. According to parole records, he had been released the previous year and was last registered in a small town near Tyler, Texas. Detectives prepared travel orders, reissued warrants, and coordinated with local authorities. The plan was simple. Locate Dale Morton, question him about the events of May 4, 1999, and bring him back to Oklahoma. Before leaving, Jennings stood for a long moment in front of Noah's old caseboard. She traced a finger along the black and white photo of the garage, the chalk circles marking where evidence had once been found. It never left him, she said quietly to Cole. He stayed hidden, but the truth stayed right here. The next morning, the Oklahoma detectives began their drive south. The sun had barely risen when they crossed into Texas. The case file spread across the dashboard, photos clipped to a clipboard. The DNA report printed and sealed in an envelope marked confirmed match. As the miles passed, Jennings reviewed Dale's history. Multiple trucking jobs, brief marriages, frequent moves, a pattern of anger and isolation. Everything pointed to a man capable of violence, but smart enough to keep moving. In the passenger seat, Cole scrolled through a database on his tablet. Address listed outside Tyler, he said, but neighbors reported he left 2 weeks ago. Told them he was heading for work out of state. Jennings stared out the window. 20 years ago, Dale Morton had left Oklahoma under suspicion. Now, with science finally catching up to his past, he had vanished once again. By the time they reached the outskirts of Tyler, local deputies had already canvassed the address. The small trailer home Dale had rented was empty. Mail stacked at the door, utilities cut off, no forwarding information. The last confirmed sighting came from a nearby truck stop. A cashier who remembered him buying fuel and coffee early one morning, driving a dark semi with no visible markings. Jennings walked through the empty trailer, flashlight sweeping across the floor. The room smelled faintly of oil and tobacco. On the kitchen counter sat a single object, a cracked photo frame, face down. Inside was a faded picture of Dale standing beside an old truck, his hand resting on the hood, the same kind of truck Noah Briggs once repaired. Jennings turned the frame over and set it down. The silence in the trailer felt too familiar, the same silence that had hung over Noah's empty garage 2 decades before. Outside, night had fallen. The wind pushed through the trees, carrying the sound of traffic from the highway. Jennings looked toward the dark horizon. Dale Morton had been found once through DNA. But now, as detectives prepared to issue a new nationwide alert, he had disappeared again, leaving behind another trail of dust, silence, and unfinished justice. Detective Hannah Cole, age 38, had a reputation that followed her through every department she worked in. Relentless, methodical, unwilling to let go of what others called hopeless. When the Noah Briggs file landed on her desk, most officers saw it as just another cold case revived by modern DNA. But Hannah saw something different, a promise left unfulfilled. The case had already consumed weeks of her nights. Her office lights stayed on long after the others had gone home. The walls filled with pinned photographs and faded reports from 1999, each marked with new notes in red ink. She replayed the timeline again and again, the argument between Noah and Dale, the disappearance, the truck near the Cimarron River, and now, the DNA proof that tied Dale Morton to the scene. But there was one question that would not let her rest. Why the river? The old witness statement from that night, a farmer who claimed to see a truck parked near the Cimarron River, had never been properly followed up. Back then, investigators searched the banks, but not the private lands beyond. Hannah began tracing Dale's history again, searching for property records, vehicle registrations, anything that might link him to the area. At first, nothing appeared. Dale had moved too often, leaving little paper trail. But then, buried in an archived county database, Hannah found a record of a leased storage lot registered under his name in 1998, a 5-acre patch of land near the Cimarron, listed as Vehicle Storage and Equipment, use. The lease had expired in 2000. The location sat less than 2 miles from where the witness had seen that truck. Hannah brought the discovery to her supervisor, Detective Marla Jennings, the veteran who had reopened the case. Together they requested a search warrant. Within days, an evidence team arrived at the overgrown lot, now abandoned, the gate rusted and half collapsed. The land stretched flat toward the riverbank, covered in tall grass and scattered debris. Old tire marks were still faintly visible near the entrance. As the team fanned out, Hannah walked slowly toward the tree line, noting small depressions in the soil where something heavy might have once rested. Near the center of the property, she noticed a slight mound, unnatural, compacted, out of place against the surrounding terrain. Metal fragments glimmered faintly beneath the dirt. She called for the forensic technician. Using shovels and brushes, the team began to uncover twisted scraps of metal, rusted, bent, unidentifiable at first glance. But as they cleared more soil, shapes emerged. A segment of fender, a piece of wheel housing, the corner of what looked like an old truck bed. The metal was consistent with a vehicle part, possibly from the late 1980s, the same era as Noah's missing Ford pickup. The discovery reignited the case. After 20 years, tangible evidence had finally surfaced on land tied directly to Dale Morton. The forensics unit marked off the area, photographing every inch before continuing the dig. Hannah kept her distance, watching as the technicians lifted the fragments from the earth one by one. Each piece told a silent story of something hidden long ago, buried beneath years of rain and indifference. By evening, the search had widened. Ground-penetrating radar was brought in to scan deeper beneath the soil. The technicians moved carefully, tracing the radar across the lot, watching for changes in density or metal signatures. The display flickered as the beam swept across the mound, then paused. A darker shape appeared on the screen. Not metal, not debris, something irregular, dense and compact. Hannah leaned over the monitor. "Run it again," she said. The technician adjusted the range and repeated the scan. The same shape appeared, about 3 feet below the surface, distinct and unmistakable. It was too small to be a full skeleton, too fragile to be ignored. The air grew still around them. Even the sound of the river seemed to fade. Hannah stood motionless, eyes fixed on the screen. For 20 years this ground had kept its secret. Now, science was about to uncover it. The technicians began marking the coordinates for excavation. As they prepared the equipment, Hannah took a slow step back, staring at the earth beneath her boots. The weight of 2 decades pressed down, all the silence, the unanswered questions. The lives paused in grief. She thought of Noah's family, of the empty garage, of a man whose name had become a ghost story in Stillwater, and of Dale Morton, who had believed that time itself could erase what he had done. The forensic scanner gave one final reading, sharper, clearer than before. The shape below was no longer in doubt. Fragments of bone lay buried beneath the soil. The excavation at the Cimarron River site began before sunrise. Forensic teams worked in silence, their gloved hands moving carefully through layers of soil. Each shovelful carried fragments of a story buried for 2 decades. The ground gave up rusted bolts, corroded tools, and then, beneath a layer of compacted clay, human bone. The remains were fragile, discolored by time and moisture. A section of a jawbone, a piece of rib, and the outline of what appeared to be a shoulder blade. The technicians paused, marking the site with numbered flags. A forensic anthropologist confirmed what everyone already feared. The remains belonged to a male adult, buried intentionally. Detective Hannah Cole stood just beyond the tape, watching as each piece was lifted and placed into sterile containers. There was no sound except for the steady hum of the river and the low murmur of the forensic team. This was the moment the case had been building toward, the moment when silence finally began to break. Back at the state lab, specialists began comparing the recovered dental fragments with the records stored from 1999. Noah Briggs's file, preserved in Payne County archives, still contained copies of his dental x-rays from routine checkups. Within days, the results were in. The alignment of the molars and the distinct chipped incisor matched perfectly. The remains were confirmed to be Noah Briggs. For Hannah, the confirmation was both triumph and sorrow. The mystery had finally given up its truth, but the truth was a grave. She sent the official report to Noah's sister, Emily, now living in Colorado. Her reply came hours later, a single line written through tears. "Thank you for finding my brother." The next step was clear. Find Dale Morton. Using his old driver's license data, parole information, and trucking records, investigators traced a pattern of employment through Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. The trail finally ended in rural Boone County, Arkansas, under the name David Morrow. The alias was thin, just a rearrangement of his initials. He had been living quietly on the edge of a wooded property, working part-time repairing farm equipment for cash. Federal marshals joined the Oklahoma Cold Case Unit to coordinate the arrest. The morning they arrived, the small rental cabin sat silent, half hidden behind overgrown shrubs. Dale's pickup was parked outside, its paint faded, tires cracked from years of use. When the agents approached, Dale opened the door without resistance. His hair was gray now, his frame thinner, his eyes hollow. He asked no questions when they read him his rights. Inside, the house smelled of motor oil and cigarette smoke. Tools lined the walls, neat, organized, precise. It looked eerily similar to Noah's old garage. He was taken into custody and transported to the Boone County Sheriff's Office, where Oklahoma detectives were waiting. For the first 12 hours, he refused to speak. He stared at the table, arms crossed, silent except to ask for water. Detective Cole entered on the second day, carrying a small folder. She placed it in front of him without a word. Inside were photographs. The excavation site, the bone fragments, the rusted vehicle parts, and the DNA report connecting his blood to the scene in 1999. For a long time, Dale said nothing. His breathing grew slower, his shoulders rigid. Finally, he lifted his eyes toward Hannah. "You found him," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied. "We did." He looked away again, the weight of 20 years pressing down like a closing door. When he spoke, his voice was flat, drained of emotion. "It was never supposed to happen like that." Hannah leaned forward. "Tell me what did happen." Dale exhaled and stared at his hands. His words came without hesitation, as though he had rehearsed them in silence for years. He said he had gone to Noah's garage that morning, angry about an unpaid repair bill. The truck Noah had fixed had broken down again, and Dale wanted his money back. The two argued. Noah refused to refund the work, explaining calmly that the problem was unrelated to the repair. The conversation turned heated. "I lost it," Dale said. He turned away and I hit him, once, with the wrench. Noah fell instantly. There was no struggle, no shouting, just the dull sound of metal striking bone. Panic took over. Dale checked for a pulse, but there was none. He stood over Noah's body, realizing what he had done. He wiped his hands, locked the garage door, and drove home. That night, after dark, he returned with his truck. He wrapped Noah in a tarp, loaded him into the back, and drove to his leased lot near the river, the same land where investigators would later uncover the remains. He buried Noah beneath a shallow pit, covered the site with metal scraps to conceal it, and left before sunrise. The next day he went back to work as if nothing had happened. When deputies began questioning him days later, he lied easily. He had practiced calm. When suspicion grew, he packed up and left the state. As Dale spoke, his tone never changed. There was no apology, no remorse, only the rhythm of a man finally releasing what he had carried in silence for half his life. When he finished, Hannah slid the written confession across the table. Dale signed it with a shaking hand. The room was still. Outside, the sun had begun to rise, its light cutting across the blinds. Hannah gathered the papers and stood. "We will be taking you back to Oklahoma," she said. Dale did not respond. He looked at the floor, his eyes unfocused, as if already somewhere else. Back in that garage, back in that moment when a simple argument turned fatal. The door opened, and deputies entered to escort him out. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, fading into silence. After 20 years, the man who had ended Noah Briggs's life was finally in custody. But justice was not yet complete. Detectives began preparing the extradition paperwork, finalizing the formal transfer of charges. The Oklahoma District Attorney's Office confirmed they would pursue first-degree murder. By the end of the day, the order was signed. Dale Morton would be extradited to Oklahoma to stand trial for murder. The news broke just after dawn. Local stations across Oklahoma opened with the same headline: "Cold case solved. Arrest made in 1999. Disappearance of Stillwater mechanic." After 2 decades of silence, the name Noah Briggs returned to every front page. The photograph accompanying the story showed a gray-haired man in handcuffs, being led through the Boone County Courthouse. Dale Morton, once a truck driver, now a convicted killer awaiting extradition. The image stirred memories that had long settled into the quiet corners of Stillwater. By midday, reporters were gathered outside the Payne County Courthouse. Microphones and cameras lined the steps, their cables coiled like veins across the pavement. Detectives offered brief statements, confirming that Morton had confessed to Noah's murder and that the remains had been positively identified through dental records. There were no emotional speeches, no dramatic declarations, only the heavy finality of fact. Inside the town, the reaction was swift and deeply felt. For those who had known Noah, the news reopened old wounds. His former customers visited the site of his old garage, now an empty, rust-streaked structure swallowed by weeds. Someone left a note taped to the door. "You fixed our cars. You deserved better." Others placed flowers by the broken signpost that still bore his faded name. Local papers ran retrospective articles, revisiting interviews from 1999.
Retired deputies recalled the frustration of the original investigation, the lack of evidence.
The dead-end leads, the technology that could not yet speak the language of DNA. Radio hosts replayed clips from old broadcasts, reminding listeners of the search parties, the missing posters, the unanswered questions for Noah's family. The discovery brought both closure and heartbreak. His parents had passed away years earlier, never knowing what happened to their son. His younger sister, Emily Briggs, now in her 40s, returned to Oklahoma for the first time in years to attend the funeral. The service was held on a warm September afternoon at Stillwater Memorial Park. The sky was clear, the air quiet except for the low hum of insects and the rustle of leaves. A simple wooden casket rested at the front, surrounded by photographs of Noah, smiling beside an old pickup, standing in front of his garage, holding a wrench in grease-stained hands. Noah was finally laid to rest beside his parents. There were no long speeches, only the quiet sound of the earth covering what had waited 20 years to be found. Detective Hannah Cole attended the service, but kept to the back. She listened as the minister spoke of peace and closure, words that never seemed large enough for what had been lost. When the ceremony ended, she stood for a long time beside the grave, watching as people drifted away. Then she returned to her car and drove back to Oklahoma City, where another case file waited on her desk. In court, the legal process moved swiftly. Dale Morton was formally extradited from Arkansas and charged in Payne County with first-degree murder. The prosecution presented a detailed case, the DNA evidence from the garage, the recovered remains, and Dale's own confession recorded on video. His defense team attempted to argue that the killing had been accidental, an act of sudden rage rather than premeditation. But the evidence of concealment, the burial, the attempt to flee the state, told a different story. After a brief trial lasting 6 days, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. Dale Morton stood expressionless as the judge read the sentence: 25 years to life in state prison. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of the gavel striking wood. For the people of Stillwater, the verdict marked the end of an era of uncertainty. Yet the relief carried a shadow. Many who had once known Dale, the man who came by the diner for coffee, who waved at neighbors, who bought parts at the hardware store, struggled to understand how quiet anger had turned into murder. Local stations aired follow-up stories, interviewing longtime residents who still remembered the searches, the missing posters, and the fear that had once hung over the town. "We thought maybe he just left," one man said. "Turns out he never got the chance." The old Briggs garage was finally demolished that winter. A small memorial plaque was placed on the lot by a local civic group, engraved with Noah's name and the words, "Gone but never forgotten." Detective Cole received a departmental commendation for her persistence and dedication. At the ceremony, her speech was brief. She thanked her team and reminded them that it had taken 20 years of patience and science to give one family an answer. Her voice remained steady, her expression calm. The applause was respectful, restrained, the kind that acknowledges justice without joy. That evening, back in her office, Hannah stood before the cold case evidence board. The photographs of Noah's garage had been replaced with newer files, other missing faces, other unfinished stories. The glow from the desk lamp traced lines of string that connected old names, dates, and maps. The Briggs file was closed, sealed, and placed on the bottom shelf. Yet as the building emptied and the hum of voices faded, Hannah remained. She stared at the rows of folders stacked in the dim light, each one marked with the same unspoken question. What happened? Somewhere, more answers waited, more lives lost to time and silence. She turned off the light and stepped out into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving only the quiet room, and the board still standing against the wall, covered in photographs and red lines that stretched like veins across the years. As the last echo faded, one detective passing by glanced through the open doorway, his eyes resting briefly on the old evidence board. He wondered, not for the first time, how many more files still waited for their turn to speak. The years that followed Noah Briggs's case were quiet. The court documents were filed, the headlines faded, and the story slipped into the archives of Payne County's long history. Justice had finally been served. but it came slowly, measured not in days or weeks, but in decades. The land where Noah's garage once stood remained untouched for a long time. The walls, weathered and buckled, leaned slightly to one side. Inside, dust coated the floor like a thin gray film, and the faint outline of tool marks still traced the workbench where he had spent most of his days. A faded calendar from 1999 hung crooked on the wall, the last page he ever turned. Neighbors passed by occasionally, some slowing their cars to glance at the empty lot. Few spoke about it anymore. The story had settled into local memory, becoming part of the town's quiet history, the kind that lingers without fanfare. People remembered Noah not as a victim, but as the man who once fixed their trucks, shared coffee on slow mornings, and always kept his word. For Detective Hannah Cole, the case became both closure and reminder. It proved that time does not erase truth. It only buries it beneath layers of waiting. The DNA breakthrough had been more than science. It was a bridge between the past and the present, connecting what people once could not see. In her office, she kept a small photograph of Noah's garage pinned to the corner of a corkboard. It was not there as a trophy or a symbol of victory, but as a quiet reminder that persistence and patience still mattered. Cases like his were rare in their resolution, and for every answer found, dozens more remained silent in forgotten files. Technology had changed what patience could not. What once required eyewitnesses now depended on microscopic traces, a speck of blood, a single fingerprint, a sliver of bone. The smallest fragments of evidence could now rewrite stories that time had almost erased. In Stillwater, the seasons continued to turn. The summer heat baked the empty roads, and the wind carried dust across the fields where search teams once walked. The river flowed past the place where Noah was buried for 20 years, quiet and unremarkable, its surface giving no sign of what it once hid. Justice had come, but it did not erase the weight of loss. It simply revealed the truth that had always been there, waiting to be seen. Today, Noah's name is occasionally mentioned when new detectives study old files, a lesson in perseverance and the quiet strength of evidence that endures beyond time. The garage still stands, its silence thick with memory, a place where the hum of an engine once echoed, where work and routine filled the air before it all stopped. In the end, the sound of an unfinished engine was the only witness left behind.